Hey friends, it's Elizabeth Morse with Simply Out of the Box, and I am here today in my garage. Please excuse it because it is in its full glory. This is where my son Malcolm, he's my younger son, keeps all of his beekeeping supplies, and we're going to talk about keeping bees today and producing honey and what it takes to get started, what that looks like. Malcolm has actually been keeping bees since he was 7. He started as a really little guy in 4-H, and I have kind of evolved as his helper. He is 17 now, so he's been doing it for 10 years and makes a really good little profit from his honey sales in the summertime. I get the benefit of having the bees near my garden, and they are great pollinators. Sadly, in the last couple of months, really, I have become super allergic to bees, which has been a bummer. And so I can kind of help him with his beekeeping supplies and maintaining things and extracting honey, but I actually don't go in the hives anymore. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to him in just a second. He's going to show you all of his bee setup and what it takes to get going.
Hello everyone, my name is Malcolm. I am Elizabeth's son, and today we're going to talk about just some of the basics about beekeeping. So I first started beekeeping when I was very young. I started out in a club and just basically learning about all the different things that bees can help and how we need them and how crucial pollinators are, especially for like fruits and vegetables and all just the daily things that we eat. I started in 4-H. And basically over time I started to become more interested, and eventually I ended up getting 2 hives. And my first 2 hives that I got 2 packages, and they're called nukes. Basically there are 2 different ways that you can buy bees. You can get a nuke or a package. And a nuke, it basically is like 4 or 5 frames, and it comes with the bees and a queen that are already acclimated with each other, and they basically are ready to start production whenever. They just need like a place and a spot. And the other option that you can go, it's called a package. And the only difference between the 2 is that it still has like 4 or 5 frames, except the queen is in a cage. And the reason the queen is in a cage is because these bees haven't become friends with their queen yet. Like the bees don't connect with the queen yet until like they've had enough time and they've had like basically enough time to just become acclimated with her. And what the benefits of a nuke are is that they will start right away, honey production will come a lot quicker, and just the beehives itself will get started a lot faster than a package will. Maybe the package will take 2 or 3 more weeks to like really get started. Let's start over here. This right here is a bee suit that I have. You can see it's all white and it comes with this wonderful veil. The veil is here, and it is very, very, very helpful because you can still breathe through it, and the bees aren't going to sting you in the face because bee stings hurt a lot. And actually, when a bee stings you, it releases a pheromone to the other bees, and the bees will smell or sense that pheromone, and they will think that that bee is in trouble, and they will try to attack you and sting you again. And so that's why bees can be harmful in large amounts rather than just like a bee sting or whatnot. Here we have some bee gloves. You can see I kind of taped this one up. It's a little on the raggedy side, but it's because I use them a lot. The gloves themselves are made out of leather, and kind of this is just the same stuff that the bee suit's made out of, just breathable, nice. You're not going to get stung through it. Very helpful. Some of the basic tools kind of that you're always going to need when going into a hive. This is a hive tool. This is going to be your best friend when you're beekeeping. It can be used to get frames out, scrape wax off frames, just like all of the daily maintenance that you would need to use like in a hive. A hive tool, very, very helpful. I also have a hive brush. This is just for like when you're pulling out frames and whatnot and you're trying to harvest honey and there are bees on it. Just an easy, soft bristle just to kind of brush them off, not to irritate them too much. Very useful. This is just a scraper. This is used for scraping off the thin top layer of wax off of a honey frame when you're extracting, so that you don't destroy a lot of the wax, so you can reuse the frames later and the bees don't have to work as hard. And it's a lot better for just like the frames itself. And now when we're on the topic, we will talk about kind of like how to set up a hive. Here, let's see this. I don't have a bottom piece with me, but a bottom is gonna look a lot like this. It's gonna be a bit deeper and a bit bigger, just because it's used for the bee production itself and the queen brood and babies and whatnot. There'll usually be a bottom piece on this, and you can set them up on bricks or cinder blocks, or some come with legs attached. There's all different types of ways that you can do it, but basically the bottom is just used for like the base of the whole thing. And then this is a deep frame. It looks very similar, except the bottom, there's nothing here and there's no attachments that you can put on it. And this is also used for brood and bees. This is like the thing you would put on the base, and is also just like you want to have enough bees in your hive. Some people just put the bottom and then they put shallows on top. Some people like to put 2 of these and then shallows on top of that. But I would say you're pretty much good with a base and then putting a deep super on it. All of the supers that I'm going to be showing today are 8 frame. The reason I say that is because you can get them in 10 frame, and they come either way. There's lots of different ways that hives can come, but the pretty much basic ones are 8 and 10 frame. This is a shallow. Shallows are used for basically honey storage in the hive, and these are going to be usually on the top. These are the ones that you can kind of pick off. They're a little lighter. Yeah, and usually you can stack these up to 3 or 4. You can stack them up to 1 or 2. Like, it's just how well the honey production is in the hive. You kind of just have to watch and understand the behavior and kind of figure out how many supers they're going to need. Let's see. I have, this is known as a queen excluder. A lot of people used to have these. I don't know if a lot of people still use them. Some people don't use them at all. But basically, if you don't want brood or honey, like baby larvae in your honey, you put this right on top of that deep frame so that the queen stays in the bottom. Like, it has these little indents so that all the rest of the bees can go through except for the queen, because it's a fatty. And so it'll stay down in the hive and do its thing, and it won't come up and mess with the honey. Because sometimes queens will lay larvae in wherever they want. It just depends on kind of the queen of the hive. Right here, this big metal thing is my honey extractor. This one has a motor on it, and it is electric. You can get hand cranked ones. But basically, what this is used for is, this is a 2, like it holds 2 frames, but you can get 3 or 4. Excuse me. But like I said, this little scraper tool, scrape off a thin layer of wax, and it exposes the honey, and you put this in the extractor, and it essentially spins out the honey from these little honey cells, and it kind of just drips down and collects in the bottom of here. And this is really awesome. I love the electric ones. The hand cranks can become tedious when you have large batches of honey, for sure. So if you have a little bit of extra money and think that electric one might be useful, it is. I would much rather do that than hand crank 60 frames or whatnot. This right here is just a bucket. It's like a strainer. Basically, in this, sometimes there can be bee larvae and there can be pieces of wax, and what this does is it kind of just, it goes through 3 or 4 different strainers and sieves and takes out all the imperfections and pieces of wax and stuff that you don't want in the honey, so that in the bottom it'll just be just plain old honey, and then you can scrape out, save the wax. You can do whatever you want with this. That's why this is awesome. Recommend getting one of these. These are all my frames up here. I have lots of different ones. Over the years, I have 4 hives, so I have to have lots of frames in rotation with them. And then this thing. This is a smoker. You might recognize this from a movie, but basically this is, like, in my opinion, a beekeeper's favorite tool. If a hive is acting too angry, or they're in your face and you're getting anxious or maybe overwhelmed, this is like your savior. This is, you can fill this up with jeans, mulch, brush, denim, sticks, whatever. But basically it's going to produce the smoke, and this smoke is going to calm the bees down and kind of force them to the bottom of the hive, and they'll kind of just, you don't have to just smoke them to death, but just light puffs of smoke, and they'll kind of like slowly start to calm themselves. It's a really, really useful tool, especially if you're going into a hive that you know maybe is a little bit more aggressive and more in your face. This is like my favorite thing in the world. Super helpful, super awesome. Here, let's go over here. So in the winter, as you know, especially in Indiana, what's going to happen is flowers are going to freeze over, the snow is going to cover everything. There's not going to be a lot of pollen and honey production in hives because there's nothing that they can get and it's too cold. This is a sugar board. And what you do with the sugar board is you line it with basically thin newspaper and you fill it with this sugar syrup kind of thing. It's like 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, and what it does is it creates this blocks of basically sugar paste, and these bees can slowly feed off of it over the winter so that they have some source and form of thing that they can make honey with and feed them without, you know, the hive dying because there's not enough honey left or all that kind of good stuff. I would say that's pretty much just the basics about beekeeping. I have a lot of stuff right here. You don't necessarily need to have all of this. I would say for starting, like if you're just doing a hive or two, you would obviously need a few supers, a few shallows, deeps. You would need a bee suit, obviously. You would need some gloves, a hive tool. But a lot of people, some people don't even use extractors. Some people just like to scoop the honey out with a spoon or scrape it off with one of those. There's like a big knife that some people use and just cut all the wax off. But I've figured out over time that when you have lots of honey, an extractor is very, very useful. And so eventually you're probably going to need to get one of these. But yeah, this is kind of like my whole station and how I've started to become better at beekeeping over time. And I've collected a lot of things. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that I got for you guys today. So hopefully this helped and hopefully you guys enjoyed. We'll show you some clips, maybe some pictures of me going out in the hive, just to kind of show you how it's done and how people do it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and see you next time.
Malcolm, thank you so much for kind of giving us the basics on beekeeping and what it takes to get started. I do have a couple questions. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about things that some folks may not know. Can you show us these? I grabbed these out of the kitchen, some examples of honey that you've harvested because there are different kinds and people might not know what the differences are.
Okay, so we'll go with kind of the basic. This is just the normal jar of honey right here. This is just pure extracted. Nothing but honey. This was a batch from October 2020. It's very light in color. Sometimes it can get darker with season, but this is obviously pretty light. What we have here, actually we'll go right here. This is cut comb honey. Basically, right here you can see in all of its glory, this is just a piece of honeycomb that has been cut out in a block kind of and put in this container with all of the honey still in it. And fun fact, you can actually eat beeswax. Beeswax is really good for your teeth, and it's kind of like nature's natural chewing gum, as I like to say. But this is just cut comb. This is not necessarily a thing that everybody makes. And this is the tool that you use to make it. It's basically, you can get it warmed up or hot, and you just, and you cut it straight out of the frame. And then this is the mixture of two. This is what we call chunk honey. Basically what it has lots of honey in it, but it also has big pieces and chunks of honeycomb and wax just floating in it. This is kind of fun. Some people like this, some people like just regular, some people like cut comb. It's kind of just like your preference and whatnot, but yeah, all of these I would definitely eat. I love all of it.
Thanks for clearing that up. So the chunk honey, is that more of like a country style? Like you don't see that like at the grocery store, right?
Right.
Okay. And then when you were talking about frames, I know that you showed people like you've got them all over the place in those boxes there. So how is it that the honey actually stays in the frames? Do they like create beeswax on the frames, or do they like, how does that work?
Okay, so basically in the frame, these bees are very particular about how they make their wax and how the formation goes. But actually what's really interesting is when they make the wax, they make these little tiny cells. Like you can see all of the individual cells and all of this right here, but they angle them just slightly up so that the honey stays in the cells. It's almost so that you can't even notice that it's angled up, but it's so that the honey doesn't basically just leak out, but they'll let that cell be opened and it'll let it cure and kind of solidify into honey. And once it's solidified, they'll put a thin layer of wax over it, and basically that becomes a honey cell or capped honey or honey that's ready for harvest.
So how can you tell, like you mentioned in the bottom, the brood chamber, which is like the nursery for the baby bees, how can you tell, like if you pulled a frame out, whether it has just honey in it or whether it has brood or baby bees in it? Like how does it look different?
So I would say the biggest difference is definitely in size. When you look at honey, it's kind of flat, and you can kind of see how there's kind of like some maybe liquid behind it, but it's not very. When you look at brood, there's definitely it's kind of like a little dome over each cap, and sometimes you can see the larva in it moving, but it's definitely pretty bigger and noticeable. There's also like just pollen cells that they'll have with pollen, and those will usually be different colored, like bright orange or a little bit brighter yellow, just because that's straight pollen. But yeah, I would say the biggest difference between the brood and the honey is that the brood tends to be a lot bigger and it kind of bulges out more, and this is kind of just flatter, and it's kind of more like obvious that this would be honey.
But if you're not used to like working with bees when you're just starting out, they're both made in honeycomb, right? So it's like both honeycomb, but one looks different?
Correct.
Okay, cool. I was trying to think what else maybe people might not know. Oh, the queens. Like you talked about the queens a little bit, but people might not know like how, like what kind of bees are in a hive. Like there really are very specific roles for each bee that they play. In different groups, right?
Yes. So I would say that there is a queen, and the queen is basically just like mama of the hive. It makes the bees. It kind of like the attitude that the queen has kind of transfers through the rest of the hive. If you get a mean queen, the whole hive is going to be mean. If the queen is calm and is really all about honey, you're going to see lots of production of honey and whatnot. There's also drone bees, and fun fact is drones are actually the only form of male bee. All of the workers and all the queen bees are basically all girls, and the drones, all they do is just fertilize the eggs so that the queen can do it. But yeah, the workers obviously go out, collect pollen. Some only stay in the hive, like usually bees that are just born, they usually tend and help other bees that are starting to form in cells. Also a fun fact, when it turns winter, the queen stops making bees because there's not a lot of honey production, and the bees and the workers will kick out all of the male bees and all the drones, and they'll kick them out of the hive. And so yeah.
Interesting. Am I missing anything? I feel like you've covered really a lot of really basic information. Beekeeping is such a fascinating hobby, and I love that you were so interested in it as a little tiny guy. And frankly, I was pretty worried as a mom about a 7-year-old. I highly recommend, if you have little ones that you are interested in getting started in beekeeping, that you consider the 4-H program. 4-H does a great job of getting kids ready, learning all the safety things about bees, because you know there can be dangers involved. Largely bees are pretty peaceful, but 4-H does a great job. They spend the whole first year, those kiddos, learning about safety and learning about hives before they are encouraged to even try their hand at beekeeping. So that was a great starting point for us, and we've had a lot of great mentors. I would also say that's been, as a mom who knew nothing about beekeeping and had a kid who was really interested, having mentors that came out and would spend their time to help him over the years have been just a great help. And we've had several mentors that had very different beekeeping styles. That was also very cool to learn. Some wore no protective gear whatsoever, which kind of made me crazy. And some were very cautious, and that's kind of a fun thing to learn too. Any other thoughts on that, Malcolm? You felt like that was a super helpful thing, right?
Well, sure, yeah. Having mentors and people helping you kind of figure out how to do beekeeping, especially when you're kind of new to things, it definitely is a big help. Like just like the general knowledge, and just like old beekeepers who have done a lot, they know a lot about it, and they can definitely help you get started, and just tips and tricks and all different types of things like that. Very, very helpful for when you're starting off.
Awesome, buddy. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. I think that you really are the expert here. I've always just been the helper, but thank you for sharing your love of beekeeping with us, and we'll look forward to some of those video clips and pictures of you out in your hives.